And in this chapter, we'll talk about macro-sociological perspectives, and in particular how these theories can help explain race in America. So first, let's talk about what theory is. Theory is a general approach to or a way of looking at an issue. A theory is a set of realities concerning a topic. In addition, a theory is a set of values concerning potentially controversial issues related to that topic. Or simply put, a theory is a way of looking at a problem. Theories involve what we believe to be true about a problem. And so for this particular slide, I put lenses here for cameras. And a theory is a lens in which you explain what you're observing about the social world. And each person's perspective or group of people's perspective can be very different depending on their location and various social hierarchies. So if you are somewhere in the bottom, so you're working class, person of color, little education, you only see things from that lower level. You can't see really what's going on. Your social networks are not that wide. You don't have a great scope and many connections like someone in more upper middle class or affluent levels. You just have different perspectives depending on your experience and your placement in various social hierarchies. In particular, for theory, we're focusing on the macro-sociological perspective. And in this particular realm of sociological theory, it looks more at institutions, structures, and larger issues. It doesn't focus on the individual or psychological issues of why a person will think or behave in ways that they do. Okay? So when we're using a macro-sociological perspective in this course, our goals are to describe accurately the pattern of relations between racial and ethnic groups in that society, and to also explain the reasons for that. So for the next couple of chapters, we're going to talk about history of race relations in the United States and reasons why we have our current racial hierarchy and how institutions can manifest in certain ways because of our racial hierarchies. So to explain macro theories more in detail, again, it takes a social structural approach. So social structures and institutions are things that definitely can enable or constrain a group of people's ability to make choices for themselves. So some structures that give you more opportunity or can constrain your opportunity are institutions like the government, law, education, the economy, family structure and what's considered normal, sexuality, race, and things like that. So these outside forces that we're able to see or not see, but nonetheless definitely have impact on us, has social forces. Okay? So with this theory, again, we're going to focus on collectivities of people, so groups of people, instead of individuals. And we're also going to focus on the nature of interactions between racial and ethnic groups, which are determined by society, so determined by those social structures. What we know by using this perspective is that attitudes of individuals are for the most part shaped by the structures of society. So what you think about, sometimes how you feel, can really be influenced by social structures and institutions. So again, your place in the hierarchy and what kinds of things you have access to can definitely shape how and what you think about. So instead of focusing on individuals, we're going to focus on positions that individuals fill. Okay, so maybe their occupational status or just positions of power, not so much on Joe Smith or anybody like that. No individual person really has that much power to really shape social structures. Okay, and this theory, again, is an approach to the study of majority and minority relations. And again, majority is not about population size. It's more about the power, access to scarce resources of wealth, power, and prestige that a group of people may have. Okay, so we're going to focus on, again, that relationship, and which emphasizes the characteristics of collectivities of people rather than the characteristics of individuals. And in this theory, we're concerned with issues of organization of society, such as economic productivity, power structures, social institutions, and culture. Okay, so one type of macro structure perspective is functionalism or order perspectives. And there's a video that's posted on D2L to give you more of a visual aid on what this looks like in a general scale. Okay, so with this perspective of functionalism, we are looking at how society are made of interdependent and interrelated parts, very similar to the human body. So interdependent means that each part needs one another. So your lung will have a very, very hard time functioning. Let's say if it was punctured, and how would that punctured lung affect other parts of your body, such as your brain or your heart? You wouldn't have proper oxygen levels, which can really hinder how your heart pumps blood and how your brain will function and how you would think if you had a collapsed lung. And similarly, if we had various structures in our society and one of them got sick, let's say the economy, let's say we were going through a recession, that can definitely influence other structures, particularly like education. Will we have enough financing to make school available to all people? How would it affect the housing industry? Will people be able to afford decent places to live, which are then related to education and school districts? So again, all these different parts of the body are related and interdependent, and all the different parts and structures of society are interdependent and interrelated. Okay. Another tenet of this perspective is that society tends towards consensus, order, and stability. So they want this sense of agreement that our society is whole and looks like it's functioning well, that it's healthy. When it's not healthy or dysfunctional, this leads to a threat to the quality of life in society and the society's ability to function. So if one structure gets messed up or there's something that comes in that hurts structures in society, other structures have to compensate. And this perspective, it doesn't really explain conflict very well. It's something it doesn't like, but it doesn't explain how it could be helpful or harmful. Okay, so overall, this theory prefers stability over equality, and that should really cause some dissonance. How can that be that we prefer stability over equality? Well, again, if you look at hierarchies, those in the very top is a small percentage of and groups of people. They like what society is as it is right now. They have more access to wealth, power, and prestige. And if we're talking about race, in our society, the people with the most access tend to be white Americans. Those at the bottom are people of color, and they don't like the current racial hierarchy. It does not seem stable or functional to them, so they would rather have conflict in hopes of redistributing scarce resources, whereas people on the top want the status quo because society is functional for them as it currently is. So with this particular perspective, if there is conflicts, it is because the disadvantaged group have some kind of characteristics which result in problems. Okay, and so what we need to do to, especially with a racial hierarchy situation, what we want to do to fix racial tension is to have the disadvantaged group, minority groups, racialized minority groups to assimilate. They need to fit into society, to do some kind of change to their culture, to their behavior, trying to be as much like the dominant group in terms of attitudes and behaviors as much as possible. Okay, and if you remember the Sneetches video, that's what the ones without stars did. They tried to assimilate by getting the stars on their bellies. They wanted to look like the Sneetches with the more scarce resources. Okay, so with race relations, a lot of problems can occur, especially if we're taking it from a functionalist perspective. Okay, we don't want to have any kind of racialized tension because that disrupts the social order. Okay, ethnic stratification or ethnic inequality is defined as a pattern under which social inequality falls along the lines of race or ethnicity. Okay, so we see here there's not enough scarce resources or it's not distributed equally across racial or ethnic lines. What we see is that this kind of inequality meets some kind of need in society. And so for people who are on the bottom of a racialized hierarchy, they are helpful for society because they may do jobs that people on the top level of society may not want to do. Okay, so we have certain laws in terms of immigration or citizenship that will allow certain people in and then cut them off when we don't want them. They don't meet some certain needs that we need in society. So really, race relations is about meeting some particular need, and according to functionalism. Okay, so inequality is a result of some other condition that in some way useful for society. And in the case of here, agriculture workers, especially if those who are undocumented, they are useful to society because they'll do this work, agribusiness, for little pay. And what is the problem here is that if they wanted to complain about the working conditions or lack of pay, they can be easily targeted, and ICE will be called on them and they'll be deported. So again, they're making tremendous amount of dollars for the agribusiness, but again, they can't really revolt or cause conflict because they will be at risk of deportation. So again, inequality meets some kind of need. We're able to get really cheap produce because of this kinds of things. So if you think about your lettuce, tomatoes, grapes, and so on, where that's coming from, it's coming from this. Okay, and so in terms of attitudes, what we have is ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism is defined as a tendency to view one's own group as a norm or standard. Okay, so you are the normative group, which all groups are compared to. And usually when making comparisons, you're superior and these other groups are inferior. Okay, outgroups are strange and inferior, and they tend to become disadvantaged groups. So it's not only our attitudes, but also how we treat people who are from a different group. Okay, ethnocentrism can be functional because it meets a need for consensus and shared identity. Although we have tremendous diversity within any racial ethnic group, we can band together as racial and ethnic groups and come to this kind of idea of we versus them. We think this way, we act this way, we believe these things, we value these things, and these is the outgroup. They're not like us. Okay? And so we also see this as, in terms of war, American versus un-American. Are you patriotic or are you not? So again, this would be very functional, that meets a need for consensus and shared identity. Okay, assimilation, and we'll see the cases of assimilation throughout our study here, but also throughout history. Different groups have come to the United States as immigrants and have assimilated, especially become part of the dominant group. However, some groups of people have tried to assimilate or been forced to assimilate and not have been recognized as part of the dominant group because assimilation has been incomplete. Okay, assimilation is defined as a process whereby a minority group and the dominant group gradually become integrated into a common culture and social system. Okay, and both adapt somewhat to each other's culture. However, more often, the minority group must adapt to fit into the culture and social system of the majority group. And so, if you think about maybe algebra, there's an equation for this assimilation. A being the dominant group plus B, the minority group, equates to, since the minority group has to change to be like the dominant group, equals A. So A plus B equals A. Okay, the minority group is the one who often has to change their culture and also has a way somehow to figure out how the social structures work and adapt to those kinds of things. Assimilation is seen as a solution to reduce ethnocentrism and ethnic stratification. What happens with this is that we see a reduction in the cultural differences between the groups because they become more like each other. We also see the elimination of legal and other barriers set up by the dominant group to exclude the minorities. Again, The minority group adapts to the culture. They also learn how to integrate into social structures. They learn the rules and behavior to be seen as acceptable to the majority group. Okay. Also, we see the development of, in the minority groups, any skills they may be lacking to enable them to participate in society. So assimilation works for certain racialized minority groups and ethnic groups to become like and accepted by the majority group. Okay, so next theory, again, macro theory, talking about structures and institutions, is conflict perspective. And with this theory, it says that society is made of groups with conflicting self-interests. Okay, self-interest being that they all want more access to scarce resources for their own groups. Okay, with this theory, they see that one group tends to be dominant and exploit the others. Okay, and so one has power and can manipulate or control the subordinate groups. Society is created and maintained by the dominant group, and this is through coercion of the disadvantaged groups. And disadvantaged groups may be coerced by accepting ideologies that are not to their self-interest. So it doesn't have to be physical force, it can be ideological forces as well. Okay. With this theory, it states that conflict is built into society. Inequality is inherited rather than earned. So it's already in the core of our culture, core of our society, and that groups, again, are fighting over scarce resources that are distributed unequally. And these groups tend to have competing interests, okay? They want the same thing, but for different reasons, okay? And these groups have unequal power, so they can't simply just divide things. One group knows that they are the majority and can take more from the subordinate group, and they want to keep the status quo to, of course, benefit themselves. That's only smart. There is the consensus is usually artificial and is not long lasting. So the functionalist perspective, that's one of the core tenets. They want consensus, or this idea of agreement. According to the conflict perspective, when this consensus or agreement is happening, it's artificial. Again, there's ideological forces being placed upon the minority group. Okay? And again, this is usually by coercion or repression of disadvantaged groups. So it doesn't have to be physical, it could be ideological through hegemony, but again, there is a suppression of thought here. And conflict, according to this perspective, is desirable. You want to have this kind of tension between these different groups because it leads to the possibility for social change and equal distribution of resources. And so if equality or equity were to happen, conflict is necessary because, again, the society is inherently already from the start unequal. Okay? And conflict is more desirable than stability because it gives a possibility for social change. So again, consensus is wanted by functionalism, but conflict is needed because it leads to the possibility of equity and equality. Okay, so let's look at this picture here. We see, and I picked this on purpose because we see here this is how social structures are really illustrated well. We have a very small dominant group. Here we have one man. However, this person, this group of people, control all the social structures here. We see physical force through the police or military. We have them controlling social structures as banks, as the government, media, law, and so forth. And then most people here who are not part of the elite of society, they have very, very few pawns with little power here. And if you look at their faces, they're all very like tense and grumpy. They know that they're in a disadvantaged position and they're likely not to win. And so again, the game is created and maintained by the elites according to conflict perspective. Okay, so more about the tenets of this perspective. Disadvantaged groups are the victims of exploitation by the powerful, and they know that. Okay, they are exploiting these people to benefit themselves. Okay, the privileged or powerful group is benefiting from the position relative to the disadvantaged group, and so they want to maintain the status quo. They do not want conflict because they don't want to have to get rid of some of their scarce resources and give some to disadvantaged groups. Okay? And what is seen as the problem here are the institutions. They're created and maintained to keep the status quo intact, to keep on privileging and advantaging the elite status people in our society. Okay, so in terms of applying this to race, again, this theory illustrates domination and exploitation, and conflict may improve the position of minority groups. Ethnic stratification is not seen as functional, it's seen as a barrier to social mobility. And so a person may be disadvantaged because of their ascribed status. They're born in a race that is not seen in a particular privileged position. So if you're born a person of color in the United States, you already have a barrier to your upward social mobility. Ethnocentrism is not seen as positive as it is with functionalism. It is seen as a way of rationalizing the exploitation of minority groups. So if they would just change to be like us, they wouldn't be targeted. If they would just learn to like education, if they would just follow the law, if they would stop blah, 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 blah. So again, rationalizing a disadvantaged person's position. So what are some solutions according to a conflict perspective? Okay, so one is that minority groups should not become part of the system or adopt the ideologies of the system. So assimilation is not seen as a solution in this case. Assimilation is seen rather as false consciousness, trying to change and assimilate to become like the same thing that's oppressing you. It's not a solution. Okay? What's seen as a solution is changing the system to promote equality and distribute resources more equally. So again, institutional changes are what's needed, not individual behavioral changes, i.e. through assimilation. There are some sub-theories of conflict theory, and one of them is Marxist theory. It states that inequality is based mainly on class. So that's the primary key component here. Okay? A central assumption of the Marxist theory is that the distribution of wealth largely determines other aspects of society, such as the political system and the culture, including social norms, values, and beliefs, or simply ideologies. Okay? Racism is seen as a tool used by the wealthy to prevent the working class from recognizing their own interests. Again, false consciousness. Okay? And so again, racism is a tool for dividing and conquering. So the elites will take this false consciousness of white superiority and take it down to the working class, particularly those with light or white skin, and tell them that at least they're better than people of color, although they're very, very similar to people of color of the same class. There's more of them combined in terms of class than there are between in terms of race. So again, race is simply as a tool of divide and conquering. So again, this is through manipulation. Working class members of the majority group support existing systems, although those systems do not help them. Okay? They are exploited also by the same economic systems that the people of color are also exploited by, to the benefit of the elites. Okay? Marxists believe that the working class will best be served by putting aside social divisions. Doing so would enable its members to think of themselves as workers first and to act on their common class interests. For this reason, Marxist theories advocate the development of class consciousness, but they believe that strong racial or ethnic consciousness carries the risk of dividing the working class. The next theory we'll talk about is split labor market theory. And this particular theory says that both race and class together are the basis of inequality. And with this, there are three classes. We have the owners of the means of production, so those are the elites, Higher paid laborers, usually white working class, and lower paid laborers are people of color. It's to the owner's interest to get the best worker for the lowest price. And we'll talk about strike breakers in later chapters where we have the white working class fighting for higher wages or better working conditions. Instead of paying that class of people more, the elites will go down to the lower class people or people of color and have them take the jobs up so they can pay them even less. And so it's to the business owner's best interest to spend less money on labor. They want to make the most profit. The only color they care about is green. Okay? And so what we'll see here is a lot of race relation tension and conflict because higher paid workers are trying simply to protect their jobs and the resources that they have accumulated. And so they will discriminate against members of the lower paid laborers. And so they won't allow them into unions. They won't give them what they need in terms of work. They won't allow them to get certain education to do the jobs that they want to do. They're just simply trying to protect their own status. So split labor market theory proposes that the working class of the majority group may often demand discrimination to protect the middle position, particularly in bad economic times when that position may be particularly threatened. So again, when there's competition or threat, that middle class group, in this case white working class, will demand discrimination or target people of color because they're simply trying to protect themselves. The next theory is internal colonialism, and this theory is defined or described as groups that were involuntarily brought under the rule of white Americans of European ancestry, okay, involuntarily migrating to the United States, in this case most often through slavery or annexation of land. Okay, in this case, majority group benefits economically. In the case of slavery, again, free labor. In case of annexation of land, taking up all the scarce resources of that land to produce wealth. We see a tremendous amount of use of force. So it's not just merely ideological, but taking, kidnapping people from a country, brutalizing them through slavery, or just doing a lot of riots through annexation of land, and also to keep the system of slavery, all through another name, in place in our society. We see later on promotion of racist ideologies and attack of cultures of people of color. So after we move on from this use of force to dominate people, we use ideological ways to keep people oppressed. And we also see that minority groups are isolated from mainstream labor markets. So there's an economic disadvantage for groups who had to come here involuntarily throughout our history. And currently, this is also happening. Okay, so the dominant group establishes a system of racial inequality for its own benefit, and usually economic. Okay, and according to internal colonialism, minority groups would be best served by rejecting attacks on their culture, rejecting calls for assimilation, and promoting and maintaining their own set of values supportive of economic development and control of resources of their own communities. And so there's this idea of separate development to protect their own economic interests. The next theory is critical race theory. Okay, there are assumptions of white superiority, and mechanisms that perpetuate it are ingrained deeply in laws and institutions. Okay, so our law, through its creation and maintenance, really takes the perspective of the dominant group. Laws were not created to really be beneficial to people of color groups. Okay, and it's very difficult to see how insidious this is in our institutions. It's very subtle. So it's very, very important to examine law and society from the viewpoint of minorities, and also to look at their personal experience as truth, as also seen as real. And what is considered objective is really majority point of view.